Got it. Okay.
Yeah. Audrey's iPad. Well, hello. I see our friend Audrey. Wait, can you unmute them, sweetheart? I can't hear Audrey.
Oh, yeah.
I did it. I'm sorry. I can unmute.
That's
Hi.
okay.
How are you?
Hello. We're good. How are you?
Fine. I hope you can import the smell of the bread cooking as well.
That's perfect. We'll see what we can make happen.
That sounds really good.
Blowing up here. How about that? Look at all my friends.
Hey. Hi, Lisa.
How are you too?
Doing well. How are you, Audrey?
Oh, hi, Judy. How are you too?
Well, hello.
Hi, Carol.
So many friends. I see Carol. We have included Adat Shalom on the Shabbat Across JDS weekend starting tonight. So we have also invited JDS families to join in, because why not allow Adat Shalom to get promotion? And if I'm teaching, it makes no difference whether I'm teaching 4 people or 40 people. So
Exactly.
Share the fun.
Right.
Absolutely.
Unless we were all in your kitchen together, that would be a little different.
Especially now. No, I've done this in my kitchen many times, and we limit it to 4 so that people can be on each side of the island and everybody can make bread simultaneously. So when we sold this class at the Adat Shalom auction and the prices were going up, Marla asked if I would sell 4 more because the price was making money. Instead of selling 4 slots, could we sell 8 at the same price? So we did. So I did it twice, but I said I don't want to teach more than 4 at a time. So we haven't done this on Zoom before, but what the heck? Why not?
Why not?
Everybody's doing everything this way. My friend Maslow. What's that, dear?
We're a friendly group, and
Yeah. And we now had some requests to record. So we're going to give us a couple more minutes, 7:31, and then we'll start. Hi, Amy.
Hello there. I just came from another meeting, so one meeting after the other.
Well, this is more fun than a meeting, right?
Most definitely. That's why I left the other meeting.
Rebecca, say hi.
Hi.
Are you, Rebecca?
Hey there.
Rebecca's our Gabby tonight, so she's managing the technology end of things.
Very cool.
Way to go, girl.
How long should we give people? We had bets in the house about how many people would show up, and I said if there were 4 screens, I would be happy.
There you go.
you've got it.
I'm happy.
Let's give it another minute or 2, because
We've got this under control, right? We have everything all set up. We have it TV style where you have various stages of things.
Oh.
Amy's laughing at me.
Because of course she does. I mean,
Well-
I would have expected differently.
Well, because I can't say, well, in 2 hours, here's what it should look like and not show you. So
Exactly.
2 hours ago, I had alarms going off on she who shall not be named, because if I say the electronic name out loud, my Amazon device, it said it, and then I'm like, what is that alarm for? I'm like, oh, I have to get the bread dough on the counter. Oh, I have to start preheating. Alexa, stop.
Alexa, stop.
Precisely what I'm talking about.
Truth.
All right, sweetie, we've got 5 people here, including us. Shall we start?
Yeah, I guess you can start.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to see you. Thank you for coming. Okay, so those of you who know me well know that I really love to bake. And are you sharing the screen? Is that what you're doing?
Yes, that's
Okay.
what I did.
So
Perfect.
I've made bread for what's what's honestly approaching 50 years at this point. I was talking to my mom about this. I've been baking since I was a really little single-digit girl. I've made a lot of kinds of bread in my life, and I learned to make this no-knead method.
Can I start?
You can start, Sharon. About a dozen or more years ago, and 99% of the time I make bread this way now. So I'm going to show you how to do this. Can I see them, or can I only see my screen? Can I see them at the same time?
And no, you can get on another device.
Okay, so let's get me on another device so that I can see my friends
Okay.
at the same time. Will you do that for me, love?
Yes. One
And then
second.
you can share the screen, but then I can see them.
Wait 1 second. Okay. Yeah. So.
All right. We good?
Yeah.
Okay. So here is why this method is so much easier and quicker than any other way you've ever made bread. We are not going to knead the bread, the dough. We're not going to proof the yeast. We're not going to make a starter. Sometimes it's called a biga in Italian, a levain in French, a pouliche in Eastern European methods. They're all the same thing. A mother, there's 100 names for this. And when you make a starter, you have to feed it constantly and babysit it. And it works great. It makes a beautiful, delicious sourdough bread, but it's a hassle. And we're not going to double dough. We're not going to triple dough. We're not going to punch it down. We're not going to rise it over and over. And we're not going to make a huge mess by dirtying a lot of kitchen items. The other thing we're not going to do is make fresh dough every time we want to make fresh bread. The other benefit there is whether you're in a household with 5 people and I make a 2-pound or bigger loaf and we go through it very quickly, or you're in a household with 1 person and you basically want to make a roll fresh or a very small loaf. Beautiful, thank you. You can do that too. So you can make as much or as little as you want out of 1 bucket of bread. And the way we do this is what I've called the secret, which is a pre-mixed high moisture dough, which stays in your refrigerator for up to 2 weeks. So you make it once and then
Lisa,
Yes.
I'm sorry. I don't know if others are having this problem, but we don't see you right now. In addition to your, we do see what you're sharing, but not you. We see a generic
I see Lisa.
Dachshund picture.
I can see Lisa.
You can. Oh, then it's
Yes.
me. Okay.
Make sure
Sorry
you're in
to interrupt.
gallery view.
I am. Okay. Sorry to interrupt. Please go ahead.
That's okay.
We set up another screen with
Okay.
it right here.
So Amy, you can see me? Okay.
I'm just the one who's off here.
Okay, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Who has a lot of experience making bread? Let me just do a quick survey. Judy, are you a bread baker?
No, that's one of the things I've not been successful with.
Okay, you've tried, but not had a lot of success.
Exactly.
Amy, have you made bread?
On the rare occasion.
Audrey
Even more rare occasion.
and Carol?
I've made challah.
You've made challah. Okay. So has anybody tried this method before?
No.
I've
Oh.
tried a version of it, but it's been several years. But it was just in making 1 large loaf, and then it's just me in 1 large loaf.
Got it. Then this is really perfect. So let's look at this next screen because I want you to really understand how unbelievably different this is going to be. There is a concept here of active time of making the bread, doing the work, versus passive time of waiting. The grand total of the active time when we talk about artisan bread in 5 minutes a day, we're making 1 batch of bread, which will takes me about 4 minutes. If it takes longer than 15 minutes, I'm not teaching you well. That will be enough for 4 pounds of bread, 4 1-pound loaves, 2 2-pound loaves, or split it up into, a roll a day, and where you have fresh baked bread, freshly baked bread as often as you want over the course of 10 to 14 days. Then we're going to make the bread really quickly in a couple of minutes here to make the dough. We're going to rest it for 2 or more hours. I call that passive time. It is sitting on the counter. You are doing nothing. Refrigerating the dough. The bucket goes in your refrigerator for 1 to 14 days. You're going to shape it into this free-form loaf in 30 seconds, maybe 60, but not more. It's going to sit on your counter for an hour, hour and a half. You're going to put a slash in it. I'll tell you why later. We're going to bake it and we're going to cool it and eat it. So the active time is incredibly minimal. The passive time is substantial. But that's why I've got stages of stuff on my counters to show you where it has already gone through that time. So you'll see the distinction. Can you go to the next screen?
Yeah.
Here are the ingredients. I will send out, I believe Rebecca already.
In progress.
Oh, what happened?
Oh, it's nothing. Okay.
Okay.
Yes, I can put the link in.
Rebecca will put the link in, or we can send it to the Adat Shalom listserv after we're done. Let's switch. Audrey, can you see me now? Audrey, are you able to see me? Oh, she's muted. Yes, you can see me.
Oh,
Okay.
I see what's wrong. Okay,
Yeah, I
wait.
switched to another computer.
Oh, she went to the computer.
Oh.
All right.
Yeah, another
So-
computer.
Now we're going to go ahead and make the dough.
Oh, you want me to finish?
Yeah,
Okay.
unship. This one won't be done if I don't do it soon. We'll go through it quick. This is a food grade bread bucket, a dough rising bucket and a lid. I do not want anybody to spend any money to try this, but if you end up saying, I love this and I want to do it, you'll end up probably getting one of these. We'll talk more about materials later, but there is no one here who does not have in their kitchen what they need to do this. You're going to use a 5 or 6 quart bowl that you can put in your fridge, and you'll use plastic wrap. I use this because I do this all the time. Going to take the simple bucket, and you're going to see why this is really, really, really easy. I have a scale. Can you point that down a little so they can see what I'm doing? Can you? Yeah, there we go. Let's point it down. I have a food scale. This is the easiest way to do this. I'm going to put the bucket on the scale and I'm going to zero it out. I am not going to use a bunch of measuring cups. I'm going to get 2 things dirty. Well, my hands, one bucket, and a stirring utensil. That's it. Nothing else will need to be washed, which is why it takes so little time. All-purpose flour. I'm going to weigh my all-purpose flour. If you have a food scale, fantastic. If you don't have a food scale, you're going to measure 6.5 cups of flour. On the ingredient list, you're going to see the measurements. I've given the measurements in both weight and cups. I am putting 910 grams of flour in here. I'll also tell you this is about the most forgiving method you can possibly use. And all the people who tell me constantly that they've had bread failures, my family will tell you that we've had good, better, and best. There are no failures. I can't ever remember a loaf that I would call inedible. Flour's in the bucket. I've done nothing. Nothing's dirty. I'm going to hit 0 on my scale. This is kosher salt. I'm using Morton's kosher salt. I'll talk more later about what kind of salt you may or may not have in your house, you're not going to go out and buy something special. I'm going to add, I have salt in a dish that I keep my salt in. I have no measuring utensils. I am literally putting salt in with my hand. I am adding the salt till I have 20 grams of salt. I'm hitting 0 on my scale. If I were measuring, I would have put in 1.5 tablespoons of kosher salt. Yeast. I buy yeast in bulk and I store it in the fridge. If you're using packets from the grocery store, 2 packets. If you're using a jar, or you're going to use 1.5 tablespoons of yeast. If you're weighing it, which is what I'm doing, it's 15 grams. You're showing them my measurements. Thank you. 15 grams of yeast. By the way, if you're a baking crazy person like I am, people buy you gifts. This is a measuring spoon that is equivalent to a packet of yeast. So it's the exact measurement of what would be in 1 packet of yeast. This is what I call a fabulous Hanukkah present if you know someone who bakes a lot of bread. I would know that because someone gave it to me once and it lives in my yeast jar. So when I need 1 packet of yeast, which I don't buy packets, then it's all done for me. I've put in 3 ingredients. I've literally put in this bucket the yeast, the salt, and the flour. I'm going to give it a quick stir. This would be apparently my holiday gift. Anybody know what this is? This is called a Danish dough whisk. You're going to use a spoon. A spoon will be just fine, a basic wooden spoon. I love my Danish dough whisk. It's an excellent Hanukkah present for me. I already have 2 though. I'm going to give this a quick stir. There's nothing in here but dry ingredients. I've done basically no work. All I'm doing is mixing that up. Water. I pre-measured our water, but if I were to measure this, what you would do is put an empty measuring cup on the scale and hit 0, and then you would add the water to get 1.5 pounds of water, 3 cups of water if you're just straight up measuring. Measurements matter. So as I taught my children when they were little, you get level with liquids. So you have to look, get level with liquids. That's how we measure liquids. You probably know that, but I have to remind people about how to measure. I'm going to teach you how to measure flour in a minute too, because if you measure it wrong, when we're putting 6.5 cups in, it's going to end up off. I am literally going to dump the water in the bowl. All my ingredients are in. I'm going to mix. All we're going to do is mix this until all the flour is incorporated. I'm not going to knead it. When I don't see dry flour, I'm stopping. One of the reasons I do like these clear bowls is because you can look at the bottom and you'll be able to tell whether there's dry flour. But any bowl will do. So far you need a bowl, a spoon, a liquid measuring cup, measuring spoons, and a dry measuring cup. While I'm mixing, I'm going to talk to you about measuring flour. I like to weigh the flour because it's quicker, it's easier, and it's more accurate. There are a lot of different ways that people measure flour. The method that I am using for 6.5 cups, bakers would call scoop and sweep. Spoon and sweep would mean I'm going to show you in a second. I'll show you in the flour. Spoon and sweep would be to actually spoon the flour into the measuring cup, and sometimes people pack it down. If you pack it down, you could easily get 6 or 7 ounces into a cup of flour. And worse still, sometimes people use a 2-cup measuring cup. In a second, it's a good question. As soon as this one's done, we're going to put that in. Thank you. And then you will end up with too much. Can you show them what this looks like? It looks like a mess, okay? It looks really shaggy and it looks perfect, but it looks like a mess. I'm going to do the easiest thing for me at this point, which is turn over my Danish dough whisk to the sink. And I'm going to get one hand dirty. Best tool I own. And all I'm going to do is get the rest of the flour incorporated. And usually, oftentimes the kids do this. There's nothing to do but literally mix it until the dry ingredients are in. So I've got a big mess, right? It looks terrible, and I'm done. Grand total of what I've gotten dirty is 1 hand and 1 whisk. Becca, trick question. Should we use hot water or cold water to get the dough off my hand?
Cold water.
Tell everybody why while I do.
We use cold water because unless the hot water will form gluten, and that's going to make it more sticky, and that's just going to make it harder to get off. So we use cold water.
We take the bucket and we put the lid on. This is really important. I have left an edge open. So if I were to close it completely, I'm trapping too much gas and it could actually explode. So I want to leave, I've partially closed it, like maybe 2/3, but I left this edge with a big gap. If you're using plastic wrap, you're going to use a big bowl and then cover it loosely, but leave one edge. I don't want you to tightly wrap it so that it's all trapped. I just want you to kind of make it a little bit less drafty, but leave an edge for gas to escape. This bucket goes and sits on my counter, a minimum of 2 hours. And this bucket here, magic of elapsed time, has been sitting on my counter for a couple of hours. It's the exact same thing. So what has happened to this bucket is it's risen. Can you see the nice bubbles on the side that have formed? Can they see that?
Yes, definitely.
So bubbles have risen in there. I've done no kneading, no rising, no doing anything. A minimum of 2 hours sitting on the counter. Now I can tell you that I have many times left it much longer than 2 hours. Why? Because I've fallen asleep, because a kid needed something, because I had to go drop off or pick up at practice or what have you. You cannot ruin this. There are I will tell you what can go wrong, but leaving it too long is not one of the things that can go wrong. So at least 2 hours on the counter If the room is really cold, it's going to need longer. If the room is warmer, it'll go faster. So I would leave it until it rises. Let's open this up and show them what this looks like. Can you see what that looks like on top? And it has a really strong smell, almost alcohol-y, because the yeast has done its business. It will rise, and I usually say that it's done when it starts to fall back a little bit. Okay, so when it seems to have reached its limit and then starts to collapse a little bit, then what do I do with it? It's spent 2, 6, 8 hours on the counter, whatever it is, but at least 2. I put it in the fridge. Make sure that whatever bucket or bowl you're using fits in your fridge. Because of time, we're going to skip to the end and come back so that you can see what's going to happen, because I'm going to show you what's going to happen after this has been happily fermenting in your fridge for a day or 2 or 5. Then we're going to form it into a dough ball, but we're going to get this loaf into the oven. So if we had an hour and a half, I wouldn't have to skip ahead, but because we have only an hour, we're going to skip ahead. This is the magic of what we've done with some that's been in my fridge. As I told Rita, I'm going to have a lot of bread. I've got 3 buckets of bread here right now in various stages. The one we just made, the one that I made this afternoon that's been on the counter, and this one that's been in the fridge for days. This one has had dough taken out of it. Okay? The dough that's been taken out of it is in this bread baking bowl, or on a pizza peel, or on a pan, or however we're going to make it. I literally took a hunk out about the size of grapefruit, which we'll show you in a few minutes, formed it into a ball, and it's been sitting on my counter, more passive time, for a while. A while. It's foolproof. An hour, 40 minutes, an hour and a half, I don't know, however long, till it feels like it's room temperature. And I forgot I had to show you because I already put 1 slash in it, but I'm going to put another slash in it. The reason we put a slash in the bread, they look really pretty when you get them with those nice patterns from the bakery. There's a reason for the nice slashes. The bread is going to have steam build up inside of it because it's a high moisture bread, and the steam will cause your loaf to crack. So you can either give it a place to crack by making a slash so that the steam can escape, or it will crack in an ugly place and it won't be as pretty. So we help it and we form a nice little slash. You can use all sorts of fancy tools. I have them. I really tend to just use a serrated knife. This is the part where on a prior slide I showed you, you literally are just going to slice through about a ½ an inch down, and the bread splits. The dough splits. Sometimes I do 1 slash, sometimes I do 3. A lot of places in Europe will do a cross. We don't do crosses here. You can make it however you want. It's all good. I've been preheating the oven. I'm going to put this one in so you guys can see what it looks like when it comes out. So now we've made the dough super simple. We set it on the counter for a couple of hours, and then we had our second bucket, which you saw of what it looked like. So the stages are our first bucket we just made, super simple, virtually no mess. Second bucket after a couple of hours or so on the counter, this goes in the fridge. Put it in the fridge for anywhere from 1 to 14 days. This particular variety can go up to 14 days. You could work with it earlier. It's really hard to manage because it's very, very sticky. So I would encourage you to give it at least 1 day in the fridge. The other thing is it develops more flavor over time. So the loaf on day 1 that you make will taste different than a 10-day loaf because it will be more sour. It will have fermented more and developed more of that flavor. Some people can tell the difference, some people can't. Whether you can or can't, you'll figure out over time. And as I continue to say, it's good, it's better, and it's best. It's all good. So it'll be fine no matter when you use it. You take out your cold bucket of bread, and it's a lot easier to work with. And of course, your hands will be clean at that point. And as I just started to say, you see how it has, let's see if I can get you to see, it has come down the sides a little bit. Yeah, there. So it has risen up, stuck to the walls, and then it fell. It collapsed back, and it sat in my fridge for all these days. Now when I want to make a loaf, I take out about the size of a grapefruit. It's the best way I can explain it. We could get really fancy and say it's about a pound. The best description that I have is a good sized grapefruit, and you will play with it over time. I often do larger loaves, but there are 5 people eating bread here. And often pre-COVID, often more mouths than that would be, showing up for dinner too. So I can do a larger loaf, but a 1-pound loaf seems to be a pretty good size for most families. Literally, you can, but I don't always do it. You can dust it with a little bit of flour, in which case I'm going to dust. This is a flour duster. If you've ever seen one, this one actually was my grandmother's. And then you're going to reach in. See how much gluten there is? See this stringiness? This is gluten. It has formed. It's beautiful. We love it, unless you're gluten-free, but then you probably shouldn't take this class and make it because it won't be good for you. And I have a very cold piece of dough. I'm going to do something that has a fancy name to it, but it's really, really, really easy. I'm going to form a gluten cloak. What I'm doing is I'm going to make a warm blanket for this loaf of bread by stretching the top of the dough around the middle. It's going to go pretty quickly. I might do it twice so you can see it twice. I'm going to set it down for a minute and show you with my hands. I'm going to take the top and pull it over, rotate, take the top and pull it over until I have stretched a thin layer around the bowl of dough. And then the bottom is going to look messy, and I'm going to just smush those bottom ends together, and you won't see them because they're going to even out and it'll look just fine. So I take this piece of dough, I'm going to make it barely into a little ball. And now I have a little ball of dough, and I promise you it's cold. Take the top and stretch it over. Rotate, stretch it over, rotate, stretch it over, and I end up doing it so I'm stretching over either 3 times or 4, so that these are either 6 pieces or 8. So my ball has been really smoothed out and doesn't look nearly as ragged. The bottom is all these little pieces that I've pulled from above, and I smush them together, and I'm done. 30 seconds, maximum 60. If this step is taking longer than 60 seconds, you're over-handling your dough. We worked hard to get all those bubbles in. We waited a long time. We don't want to smush them. At this point, I have some choices about where I'm going to put it. You saw me use a fancy bread baking bowl, but I said you're not going to spend any money. I don't want you to do anything complicated. You're going to use a cookie sheet, which I'm guessing everyone has, or you're going to use, you're probably going to end up using an upside down cookie sheet. If you happen to have a pizza stone, This is a really inexpensive, crappy pizza stone. It's too thin, and the thin ones are $5 or $10, but they will break within a year. If you use them a lot, the high heat and high moisture that we use, they crack. I'll make frozen pizzas on these, and they're just fine for us to bake something simple on. And they get discolored like this, just like my bread bowl. It's actually not discoloring in a bad way. It's discoloring in a really good way, as it's picking up the patina of your baking. This is a cast iron pizza pan. It's another good option. These don't break. They're cast iron. They're really inexpensive. I like to bake on these. I have two. I have a dairy and a parve. Needless to say, if I make a bread with cheese in it, or I make a bread with milk in it, like a cinnamon raisin bread or something, where I have a dairy, like a powdered milk in it, or butter in kind of a bread. These are great because I broke a lot of cheap pizza stones. Really, really good thick pizza stones. $100. I still don't trust us in this household with kids not to break it. So I ended up going with the cast iron. But the really nice pizza stones I've used in culinary schools are terrific. If you want to invest in one, they're great. But I'm afraid that this is just easier, and this cast iron will probably go to one of my kids when I'm gone, because they're really solid. You are going to do this. You have a traditional cookie sheet. You're going to turn it upside down, because I don't want the rim. If you have a rimless one, it'll work just fine. Parchment paper is going to be your friend, because the dough is sticky. You can either use a full piece of parchment, or if you have parchment rounds for the bottom of a cake pan. I'm going to set it on the cookie sheet, and then I'm going to put that little dough ball we made here on the parchment round. If you don't have parchment, you're going to dust the cookie sheet either with cornmeal, or a coarse cornmeal will be better, or with flour. The flour will burn a little, but it won't matter. Now I've got this ball of dough, and it's going to sit on the counter. In normal bread baking, you'd have to cover it, you'd have to proof it, you'd have to protect it from drafts. Just sit it on the counter for an hour, hour and a half, whenever you remember. It's all good. If you leave it a long time, it will spread a little and get a little weepy. A little water may come out of it. It'll still be fine. It's almost impossible to ruin this. 40 minutes, an hour is good. It'll warm up. Then you're going to slash it and put it in the oven just like we did. So this sits.
Do you want us to share screen?
We can go back to sharing screen, because I think I'm done showing them everything.
Okay.
If you're going to sit it on the counter for about an hour, around 45 minutes in, 40 minutes in, you're going to turn on your oven to 450.
Okay, where were we?
Where are we?
Right,
What are you doing, babe?
because we went through there.
Oh, you're going back to the share screen.
Yeah.
Don't go to the questions yet. Go to the blue table. There we go. Perfect. Thank you. You'll bake the bread for about 25 to 30 minutes. If you can, you will take it off of the parchment and put it directly on the rack in the oven to crisp up the bottom. If you remember, 2/3 of the way through or so, 15, 20 minutes in, and the bottom will brown more, and you'll get it crisper. You'll know the bread is done when it looks done, when it is a golden brown, and you pick it up and you thump the bottom of it, you knock on it, and it sounds hollow. So you'll begin to feel what that feels like. If you've made and baked bread before, that works great. If you have a thermometer, if you have a thermopen, which is what this is, or if you have any kind of an instant read thermometer, you're going to look for about 190 degrees. If it's telling you it's 140 degrees, put it back in. If it's getting too brown, you can tent it with aluminum foil on top and continue to bake it until the interior is cooked through. Ballpark, you're going to be looking 25 to 30 minutes for a 1 pound loaf, that grapefruit sized loaf. Take it out and put it on a wire rack to cool if you have one. If you put it on a plate or you put it on a cutting board, a wooden cutting board, or even worse, a plastic board, it's going to get very soggy on the bottom because the moisture of the steam coming out of it will make the bread wet. So a wire cooling rack where it has air all around it is your best bet if you have one. If you cut it into it too soon, it will be gummy and it will tear apart and you won't be able to hold it. And your work will have been unnecessarily damaged. So try to let it cool fully or to a warm temperature, not hot. You're going to need a serrated knife to cut through it, a bread knife. I'm going to show you what I meant by measuring the bread, the flour. Can we go back to showing how to measure flour? Many people, Rebecca, can you possibly show from above? Will there are lots of different ways to measure flour. What I call the spoon and sweep is either pouring the bread flour in where I'm kind of aerating it as I go, or literally spooning it in to the cup. And then when people get done, they've been taught correctly to sweep and level off. This is going to result in less flour in the cup because I'm putting it in like snow than the way I'm asking you to do it, which is actually quicker. So the scoop and sweep method will put about 5 ounces in a cup. So I'm going to, yeah, they can see that. I'm literally going to scoop and level. That's the scoop and sweep. Does that make sense, what I just showed you, the difference? Okay. The reason I don't want you to use a 2 cup is because if you were to scoop with a 2 cup, it's going to compact much more and we're going to end up with too much flour. Some details about the ingredients that I get asked a lot. This is the kind of salt that I'm using. It's Morton's coarse kosher salt. This is my personal standard and what I learned with. If you're using Diamond Crystal brand kosher salt, it's more coarse than this brand. So you're going to use about a quarter to a third less. If that's the kind you have in your house, don't go out and buy the Morton's. Just use the Diamond Crystal, but use about a third less. If you're using regular table salt, it's much finer. So it has less air in it. Other way around, the Diamond Crystal, you're going to use less of the table salt. You're going to use more of the Diamond Crystal. I said that backwards. I'm so sorry. So let me repeat it. Morton Kosher, we're going to use a tablespoon and a half. This is my standard for this recipe. If you're using Diamond Crystal, you're going to use 2 tablespoons, about a third more. But if you're using table salt, you're only going to use a tablespoon. You will use less because it is so fine. Yeast. I use active dry yeast. You can use any kind of yeast you want and it will work in this recipe. With the long period of rising without kneading, any yeast will work. I like active dry granulated yeast. If you have instant yeast, it'll work. The number one most important thing about yeast is that it's not expired. If it's expired, this will fail. That is a guarantee. So fresh yeast is critical. I do keep mine in the freezer. So I buy a 2-pound block of yeast at Costco. And then I put enough for my kind of regular use in the fridge, and then I reload it from the freezer. But just make sure, and we can tell, I can tell, oh, my bread isn't rising, or my challah isn't rising, whatever I'm making isn't rising. I can tell that I'm not getting the rise. I'm like, oh, by the way, I should check my expiration. Water. Here's the rule. If it's water you'll drink, it's fine, okay? You do not need bottled water. You do not need filtered water. If you will drink the water, use the water. Here's what could go wrong with water. It's too hot. Water that is too hot will kill your yeast that is not expired because you checked the expiration. So the water needs to be what I would call comfortable on the back of your wrist, like you would check a baby's bottle. 100 degrees, if I'm measuring it with my thermometer, is great. Anything about 100 degrees or less, if you have a kitchen thermometer, great. If you don't, this is on the expensive end of the Hanukkah presents. This is a fabulous present, but these are $100. So thankfully I have people who love me and buy me my presents. But if you aren't sure, too cold is fine. And the reason that too cold is fine is that, no. We have a little crisis that Noah is going to help Rebecca with for a minute. Thank you. If the water is too cold, instead of taking 2 hours to rise and collapse, it'll take 3 or 4. So too cold will simply make the rising process go slower. Too hot will kill the yeast. So I would always rather you err on the side of, if you're not sure, colder water will be just fine. So people have tried this method and risen the bread on the counter for 36 hours. I'm not sure that I want to recommend that, but there are people who will argue that the taste will be more slowly and more effectively developed by going slower. So cooler is always going to be better. Hotter is potentially going to kill your yeast. Flour, all-purpose flour, any kind will work. I don't care how cheap or expensive it is. The only thing I ask is that it be unbleached. There are debates in the baking world about whether or not it really matters, whether the flour is bleached or not. But environmentally, I can tell you we'd rather have the flour unbleached. I can tell you nutritionally, we'd rather have the flour unbleached. And there are people who believe that the bleach alters the absorption of water by the flour. So let's just be safe and go with unbleached flour, any brand. All-purpose flour. You can use organic. I like King Arthur flour. You don't have to use what I like. I buy 25-pound bags at Costco, or during COVID, I would have 50-pound bags shipped to me. But I use a lot of flour. And I have, 15 or 20 kinds of flour in my house most of the time because I make a lot of different kinds of bread. This is plain old all-purpose flour. And by the way, flour, water, yeast, and cheap salt, cheap cartons of salt, the loaves are under 50 cents a piece with organic flour. So you're making a loaf of bread for under 50 cents with 5 minutes of actual labor involved. And as you saw, one dirty spoon, and that's it. The interior of the bread, the dough buckets, we'll talk about these first. This is a 6-quart dough bucket. You need a 6-quart bowl. If you're going to make ginormous batches, you're going to need at least an 8 to 10 quart bucket, but you're going to have a harder time fitting it in a fridge. So I like a 6-quart bucket. A lot of times when you buy these, they sell the lids separately. You need lids. So you're going to have matching set of lids. Cambro, C-A-M-B-R-O, is the brand name that is easily found if you're on Amazon to buy a Cambro food grade bucket. If you don't want to cook in plastic, we're not heating in it, but these are BPA free and all of these. So you're going to want to make sure. I don't think they're even sold that way anymore. But you can use glass if you're concerned, but you have to get glass. And there's almost always a plastic lid for the glass ones. I don't have any glass ones because they'd be broken here. It's senseless. I've used these forever, and I'm also going to randomly tangentially tell you a trick that I do use a lot. When I finish, we have probably one more loaf in here. Don't wash the bowl. I know it sounds nuts. Don't wash it. Make another loaf right in here, because basically you've got beautiful fermented dough starter that's already here, that's been sitting in your fridge for 10 days, 14 days. Just zero out your scale and make it right on top. It'll mix right in and incorporate. It'll taste even better. And we've done even less work because we're not cleaning it. I will confess that after 5-6 buckets, I wash again. We are baking it at 450 degrees. So if you're concerned, it's going to get killed, anything that's in there. We do wash hands a lot. The crust. This is always a topic of discussion. If you want your crust crispier, which a lot of people want a crackling, crispy crust, there are a couple of ways to get it. One is to get a pizza stone, some sort of a pizza stone. The stones themselves are porous as opposed to my steel ones. The stones will absorb some of the moisture, which is why they're also fragile and prone to cracking when temperatures change. But they will absorb some of the moisture. And now I'm going to tell you something that's going to sound counterintuitive. The second way to make the crust crispy, which is the most foolproof way, is to put a broiler pan in the oven when we're preheating the oven, an empty broiler pan. So you're going to bake on the middle loaf and you're going to put an empty broiler pan below. It has to be a pan that can tolerate heat. That pan needs to be made of metal. Please do not use a glass Pyrex pan, or you're going to call me up and tell me that it shattered in your oven. Glass is a bad idea for this purpose. A metal pan. And what you're going to do when you put your bread in is you're going to put a cup of hot water in that broiler pan immediately and shut your oven, because it is going to create steam. You are creating an injection steam oven the cheap and easy way by putting a cup of hot water into that pan underneath, because that hot water will then steam through the oven. That steam will cause the bread to rise more and produce a really crisp crust. So if you're a fan of the crisp crust, stones and the steam are your best method. The scale is fantastic because I dirty less stuff and it goes a lot quicker. I learned this method through these wonderful people called Francois and Hertzberg. Artisan Bread in 5 minutes a day. This is the Bible. Their second book is called Healthy Artisan Bread in 5 minutes a day. The recipe we made tonight came from here. 4 ingredients, master recipe, easiest way to learn to do this. Most of the time I make whole grain breads. So I don't make the straight up white bread. So if I want to make 100% whole wheat bread with honey or with olive oil, or I want to make a brown rice bread or a quinoa bread or a seeded oat bread or one of the many kinds of breads that we make here, a lot of those recipes came from the Healthy Artisan Bread in 5 minutes a day. You can also make pizza dough. You can make breadsticks. You can make ciabatta bread. You can make darn near anything you want. I've been asked many times about challah. I do not make challah this way. You can, I have tried, and my family will not like it because it's not as good as my regular challah. So I simply stopped trying artisan bread in 5 minute a day recipes for challah because I just said, you know what, my challah is good. We like it, we're done. I make my challah dough in a bread machine.
Your challah is not even good.
Thank you. Did you hear what my sweet daughter just said? She said, your challah is not good, it's terrific.
I agree with her.
Oh, well, thank you, Amy. There is a website called Artisan Bread in 5. I'll send you guys the PowerPoint. I wrote all this down. KingArthurBaking.com is a really good place to buy a lot of the tools. So if you really wanted to own a Danish dough whisk or a thermopen, they sell all these lovely things there. They sell my Vermont baking bowl somewhere else. These are things you can talk to me in time. They have great parchment paper, which Cooks Illustrated says is the best parchment paper. They've tested it. Yeast, you can get really expensive, high quality yeast from France, from SAF. It works fantastic. I cannot tell the difference in this method of bread after it's sat in the fridge for 1 to 10 days. So I don't bother with this kind of bread. If I'm going to make the old-fashioned slow version, I'll use better yeast because I can tell the difference. Here, all the yeast is great. I use Red Star, typically just Red Star active dry yeast.
Okay, we have 1 minute left for the bread, and I just checked on it.
I am going to take the bread out of the bowl and show you what it looks like, the one that we put in the oven a little while ago, and then we'll switch it. Oh, are you filming me?
Of course.
Okay, there's our bread. You see? So the bread is here. This bowl is super, super hot. Bottom of the loaf is very blonde. So I'm going to stick it back in for another 10 minutes. But we can see what the loaf looks like. It's the exact recipe we just made. Directly on the rack. Shut that off for me. Thank you. And that is an hour. What questions do you have about what we just did? Carol's coming to the screen.
So do you not use bread flour? And what's the difference between all-purpose and bread flour?
Okay, it's a great question. The difference between all-purpose and bread flour is the protein content in the bread.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is different brands of bread also had different protein contents in them, the percentage of protein. So pastry flour, for example, has a very low protein content. We're talking about 6%, 5%. It varies from brand to brand. The reason we want low protein content in a pastry flour is because we don't want gluten formation. So the protein percentage in pastry, we want to be very flaky. We don't want it to pull. Like in challah, when you have super high protein content, I do use bread flour because I want it to pull. Those challah strands, when you pull it apart, that are beautiful, when we pull, that's high gluten. Here in a French bread, I don't want that kind of a pull because the texture is wrong. We're also usually putting eggs in challah. So we're changing the protein dynamic of the dough and the moisture content with the eggs. Here, the bread flour, in my opinion, alters the interior of the bread, and you don't get that nice, what's called a custard crumb. So you want a crackling crust is the gold standard, and a custard crumb where it's creamy. And with bread flour, it won't end up as creamy inside. It ends up too glutenated, too chewy for my preference. And the protein content is too high in bread flour. If I were in a pandemic, for example, and all I had in the house was bread flour, and I didn't have access to all-purpose flour, I'd call my friend Lisa and say, what do I do to the recipe to alter it so I can use the flour that I have? And we would make it work. But if I were going out and buying it, now that flour and yeast is available much more easily, I'd stick for all-purpose flour for this recipe. I cannot think of a single artisan bread recipe I make that uses bread flour. So I end up using whole wheat flour, rye flour, spelt flour, a lot of different kinds of flour in my house, but I don't use bread flour. What I do is I add gluten. So you can buy powdered gluten to whole grain bread. So if you go to Mom's Organic Market or Whole Foods or on King Arthur Flour, you can buy bags of powdered gluten. And in my experience, if I don't add about 15 grams of gluten to a whole grain bucket of this kind of bread, it doesn't get enough rise, and my kids won't eat it, and it tastes like a brick. So I don't want it to be that dense. So the gluten will give me more density without giving me that stringy pull. So it makes whole grain breads turn out really well. So I add gluten in, but not by using a higher protein content of bread flour. It was a much bigger answer than you wanted, but hopefully that answered your question. Did that do it?
Yes, yes. And I have to tell you, I just bought my brother, who's been into baking bread, a thermopen for Hanukkah.
It's a great gift because you use it for everything. You can use it for checking the temperature of a steak. Sorry, Amy, I know you don't eat meat, but you can tell the difference between when you're grilling, if it's rare or medium rare or whatever you want it to be with a thermopen. And then you can take the temperature of your bread. You can take the temperature of your chicken. It's a fabulous tool. So nice. I'm sure it will be appreciated. Other questions that I can answer about this?
So do you recommend that we start using the unbleached all-purpose flour and then move to the whole grains? Because we don't usually have any white flour bread in our house.
I can give you a recipe. I can email you a recipe for a basic whole wheat bread or whatever kind of bread you want that I like. If you haven't tried this, if you want to try it, feel free. It's a little harder to learn on a whole grain bread than it is to learn on this straight up white bread. My kids are thrilled because I don't usually make plain old straight up white bread. And we have now got, 12 loaves of it that are in process in some stage or another right now, so they'll be delighted. You can, by the way, freeze dough and use it later, so you can freeze it in small balls. You can par bake a loaf. So if you buy par baked loaves, like for Thanksgiving, you'll buy them a lot, or for holidays, where they're partially baked and then frozen, and then you finish baking them when you're ready to eat them. So this dough will work in all those ways, and I can tell you how to do that too. But if you want to try and start on a whole grain bread, tell me what you want. I mean, I use leftover brown rice to make brown rice bread, or I'll just make double what I would use normally, what we would make for dinner, and then the leftovers go in. Raw quinoa goes in quinoa bread, literally raw, uncooked quinoa, and the hydration of this method basically softens it, and then it cooks, and then I'm getting high protein, healthy quinoa in my family in bread, and they like the quinoa bread. I use white wheat flour, which is probably a good thing that you could try. White wheat flour is nutritionally identical to the darker flour, but it's made from a different variety of wheat, as opposed to having the bran stripped off of it, which is a misnomer. That people think that it is less healthy, like white rice and brown rice. It's not less healthy if you're buying actual white wheat flour. It's a little easier to cook with, and for many people, a little bit less offensive. It doesn't taste as hearty. It doesn't taste as healthy, but it is. So I often will either use a combo or just use all white wheat flour. But I've got a great recipe for 100% whole wheat bread with olive oil, or with honey, or a wheat sandwich bread, and you can certainly try it. Other recipes have more than 4 ingredients usually, so 7 to 10. So you're adding on a few minutes for adding more ingredients. If you're weighing them, you're still not making anything else dirty. You're literally just spooning in, stirring your dry ingredients, adding your water, usually just water. My rye bread has molasses in it, so water and molasses. So there are other ways that we add color and flavor and depth to the breads. I've had tremendous success over the last 10 plus years with this method, and there are an unlimited number of no-knead recipes on the internet. So if you're looking, you won't have a shortage. These books are pretty reliable as a starting place. Mine are really beaten, and I have a lot of writing in a lot of my books. I do get questions about salt. Can you reduce the salt? And the answer is yes, you can reduce it. I wouldn't take it out completely. It alters the flavor too much, to the point that I think it doesn't taste good, but you can certainly cut it down if you need a low sodium diet. The other thing that became very clear in COVID is you can reduce the yeast. If you had a yeast shortage, you could cut the yeast as far as half, and then double the rising time is more or less the formula. But when people were really short on yeast, there were people experimenting all over the world, and you can cut the yeast down profoundly and stretch your limited yeast supply out for both cost and just simple savings. In certain parts of the world outside, there's more yeast in the air, which is why San Francisco sourdough has a unique taste, because the yeast spores are literally in the air, which is why sourdough bread made in Baltimore tastes different than in San Francisco. But you can capture natural yeast by putting your bucket outside and getting more yeast. Rebecca's reminding me that we may be cut off by a Dot Shalom's limitation, and B, I want to pull the bread out. So here's our loaf. It's really hot because I just pulled it out of the oven. It's imperfect, it's homemade, but it's really yummy. And
Is the bottom
it's
better?
the incredibly easy recipe that we just made. And you've got homemade bread to put on your Thanksgiving table to feed your kids. And it cost 50 cents. You used organic flour if you wanted. You made it with your hands and you got virtually nothing dirty.
Okay.
So I hope you try it. We will put the slides with the ingredients and the questions on, I'll send it out to the listserv. If you have questions, you can email me, you can call me. I've talked to people through lots of this, but it rarely fails. I mean, I've never had this fail. And I really don't want to make bread the old fashioned way because it's just so much easier. So thank you so much. I hope this was fun and interesting and you feel inspired to do this.
Thank you. And thank you, Rebecca,
This
for
is
being
excellent.
rabbi.
Yes.
Really
thanks very
fun. Thank you
much.
both.
It was very
Great
good.
job.
Thank you, Lisa.
Great job.
I
Thanks.
hope everyone's having a good night. I wish you all a happy Thanksgiving. And oh, Stacy, I see you. You showed up. I can email you the deck if you want, if you got here late. And then if you have questions, you can let me know. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Happy Thanksgiving and Chag Sameach for Hanukkah in advance. Shabbat Shalom for tomorrow.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.